Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you for being here for today's debate. Thank you, Lina, for the film. We will now welcome on stage Lina, the director on the film.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Et j'appelle également Hasni Abidi.
And I also invite Hasni Abidi, specialist of the Middle East and professor in Geneva, to join us on the stage.
Merci.
He will share with us his views and his expertise. And I will switch to English. But in any case, there's interpretation into French and English, and feel free to speak the language of your choice.
Thank you, Lina, for this film. It's a rare opportunity to have an insider view of what happens when a country falls into a struggle that is developing into such a huge crisis with its personal, intimate dimensions, the political ones, the tragedies too. Can I ask you a question? Do you remember what the Lina of 2011 was? Who were you when it all started? What was in your mind? Were you politicized? Were you already an activist of some sort? Or did these events push you into action?
I was a bit of an activist. I couldn't really be, I mean, I was a journalist, but not the way I wanted to be because there was so much censorship. So I would volunteer to help with, various issues and causes in trying to create a bit of the change that I wanted to see. I couldn't be politically activist because politics was completely banned. There was no practice of politics. So a lot of the activists during the revolution and many of the people that later became activists were also volunteers with the Red Cross. They were volunteers with NGOs. They were just people that wanted to do things and didn't find any other alternative to take action.
But did you think at that time, at the beginning of the events, that peaceful resistance or peaceful movements, demonstrations and so on, would be enough to overthrow the Assad regime?
Before 2011, so before the Arab Spring, no one thought that that would be enough. And then Tunisia took us all by surprise, and then Egypt. So people started to dare to hope, and at some point, it was just enough that you create hope. There was no guarantee for anybody, but just to open up the possibility of it maybe working, that was enough to push people to the streets.
The film is also the story of the end of illusions. And in the end, the few sentences that you say at the end of the film are quite bitter about disillusionment. Is this the way you felt at that time, or is it something that you recreated afterwards when you made the film?
So as events progressed very quickly, very intensely, there was fear, there was worry, there was anger, there was hope. Disillusionment happens very slowly. So bit by bit, year over year, it occurs. I think they sound very also intense in a sense because it is just the conclusion you reach after, well, when I wrote the voiceover, it was already 10 years into events. So if you're trying to sum up 10 years of disappointments, yes, it's going to sound quite bitter.
What do you think, retrospectively, you missed at that time? What was missing to get to victory? Is it international support? We see the moment when Russia and China put their veto at the UN. Is it some internal dimension that you missed, or what was your the gap that prevented you from winning at that time?
Well, the events of December 24 showed us that it was not international support that we were missing. It was the lack of international intervention. That was what we wanted. If there had been no intervention from day one, from any international side, we would have been able to take him down in 2 years max. It was not his army that was holding on. It was not people that are allied to him. It was the Iranian militias. It was the Russian Air Force bombing. It was their vetoes. It was all the support he was getting internationally. Locally, he never would have lasted this long.
Hasni, what were your feelings when you saw the film? Because you followed very closely all the events in Syria over this past decade. But looking at it from the inside of a small group of Damascus activists, how do you react to this film?
La première remarque, c'est que finalement le film, même s'il s'agit d'un témoignage et un récit.
So the first thing I can say is that even if it's a very personal story, it shows what happened in Syria in a more general fashion. You heard the word doubt, but the doubts were very pregnant everywhere. So the debate that sparked by the film is the same discussions that they had in Syria for years. On the one hand, is it a good thing that opposition be radicalized, or do they need to remain peaceful? Do we need involvement of international forces, or do we need to let Syrians handle their crisis on their own? So what's interesting with this film is that it starts from a very personal story, a very intimate story, and it gives a face to a situation which was the most difficult in Syria. Choices had to be made in Syria. The Syrian regime, as opposed to Tunisia, for example, made radical choices, which in turn radicalized the opposition. Because the Syrian regime was the last one to fall. It was the last one standing and stood for several years. Since 2015, that's when Lina leaves Syria. That's also when Russia got involved, and Bashar al-Assad was quite weakened already in 2015. And there was a very interesting sentence in the film. He said, "We only need no-fly zones." And that's so true. That's exactly the situation. From the moment Russian planes came and started bombing, they guaranteed the survival of the Syrian regime. So what's interesting with this film is that it shows history with very intimate pictures, and it brings answers to quite a number of interrogations. And it also shows interpersonal dynamics, individual dynamics, and it's through personal actions that things came about. We didn't see much manipulations or manipulation from outside, because very often that's what lingers. We've seen it in Egypt.
In the film, you present very well the moment when armed groups come to the forefront, and the resistance switch from peaceful to armed. And some of you in the group, you have this discussion about whether it's a good or bad evolution. Do you think it was unavoidable to go into armed resistance?
At the moment, we were hoping that it would be avoidable, but now in retrospect, seeing how far he was willing to go and how far his allies were willing to go, I don't think it was avoidable.
But it's also implied the extremist groups taking over part of the revolution, and therefore plunging the country in further chaos.
I mean, that is the main danger with taking up arms is not because people don't have the right to defend themselves. Of course they do. But because arms are not something you can control if it's not an established state with monopoly on arms, with established borders, with an international law that protects it from outside intervention and countries that want to do land grabs and interfere. If you're just a small group that has defected from the army, you have your rifles, you have a few bullets, you're going to run out of them sooner or later. Then what do? Then you need gigantic amounts of funding to continue to get your ammunition, to continue to develop your weapons. It is impossible to maintain your independence like this. So sooner or later, you will be hijacked by whoever is supplying you. It's like being a drug addict. It's a very dangerous path.
Hasni, but this question of armed resistance and the fact that you become the client of those who supply the arms, is this a frequent dilemma?
Oui, c'est posé même, c'est posé pour la France.
Well, yes, absolutely. And it's a dilemma that was also faced by France and by other states where
Opposition.
there was an opposition. It started with Turkey, and then other states came in. It's a very difficult choice to make. And it's true that an Arab Spring or peaceful demonstrations against the regime, weapons are life insurance. But at some point, well, there were questions raised when torture came about, and then there's also the outside element, the temptation of foreign support.
C'est pas un seul acteur.
But it's never only one foreign stakeholder, but many of them. And when there are many of them, they manage to find clients. They create division within the opposition. So we start with a united opposition that wants change for Syrians, and then we move on to different agenda, different priorities. And that's the threat that all revolutionary movements face. Because at some point, the regime is also working on this division. The regime feeds itself on the division of the opposition. For example, in Syria, there were quarrels and divisions between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, which has the support of the US, saying that the Qatari were too weak. There were meetings here in Geneva, in Lausanne, in Montreux, with Friends of Syria. That's decades of attempts to organize the opposition that did not lead to anything federated. But once again, coming back to local dynamics, when we look back at what happened in December, the 8th of December last year, it all happened on the ground. So there were interventions, of course, but it's the local dynamic, local impetus that changed the situation.
In exile for many years now. Were you surprised on December 8th, or did you expect something to happen?
No, it took me completely by surprise. After going back and talking to people, it turned out that actually a few people were expecting a major operation in the north, but it was mainly targeted towards Aleppo. They were not planning to continue and take over the entire country. They were not expecting to be able to this easily. So everything was set up to leave from Idlib, which is right next to Aleppo, expand the area that the rebels control, hopefully take over Aleppo, which is the second biggest city. But when they found that regime forces were just withdrawing, they weren't even fighting, they kept going.
So you went back to Damascus in December, quickly after, soon after the takeover of the capital. Tell us about your feelings when you arrived there.
The first 2 days, I was just waiting for somebody to wake me up. Literally, this place that for almost a decade I had only been seeing in my dreams. I found myself inside my dreams. But habit kicks in very quickly. I found myself navigating the streets again very easily and seeing old friends, realizing how much I've aged when I look at them and see how much they've aged. But it was, I mean, euphoria isn't even the word for it. It was a collective state of, yeah, we need new vocabulary for this scale. Everybody was beyond happy. Of course, there were already fears and there were already worries, and they were very justified. But for a moment, for a few weeks, we were telling all of our friends that are justly preoccupied for us and for what's going to happen in the country, can you please just pause? Like, we've been through so much. We just want to be able to celebrate for once. Just give us this pause, allow us to enjoy. And then, you know, the next day we'll wake up and start up the rest of the struggle. But we chose to take this moment to ourselves.
So what did you do in Damascus? Did you visit friends, and did you take the habit of a journalist again? I mean, what were your...
I had no idea what I was shooting for, but I was with my camera the whole time. I went to Damascus, to Homs, to Hama, to Aleppo. Unfortunately, there was not enough time to go to other places. First person I saw was Susu. I met her again. She is as active as ever. She just does not stop working. She's incredible. The rest of the characters of the film were not there at the moment. When I arrived, it was just her. But of course, there were many, many other friends, people that I have not seen in 15 years. Just walking in the street, I would run into somebody that I thought was on the other edge of the planet, but people had just flown in from everywhere. And in the evenings, we would usually gather in this famous cafe downtown. So you don't even need to like make appointments. You just go there and you run into people. And Syrian people are usually not very openly emotional. So we don't hug, for instance, when we meet. We just shake hands. For a month that I was there, for about 3 weeks, I have never seen that many people hugging each other on the street openly in Syria. It was just everywhere you looked, people were smiling and hugging each other. There were also loads of activities taking place. So there were panels, there were lectures, there were cultural events, there were film screenings. All the films that have been in exile for years, Syrians have not been able to see their own films. There were just ad hoc screen. At some point, there was this a group of people with portable projector going around the old city and doing flash mob projections of films for people. Media went back. Finally, the media that has been in exile for so many years, they're going back. They're opening offices. They're having, official correspondence. One of the earlier newspapers to be established right after the revolution started reprinting paper copies again. So it's really so overwhelming. I mean, we were calling it a marathon. Every day there were at least 6 or 7 events we wanted to go to. You couldn't keep up from morning till evening. There's always something to attend, but there were also very emotional moments, like people that got confirmations that their missing loved ones have indeed been killed. And they were able to finally have a funeral, to openly say, this happened to my son, and to have neighbors and family come and condole them. There were gigantic funerals of the martyrs that took place. The first demonstration, quote unquote, in Damascus, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets for the funeral of Mazen al-Hamadi. He had been arrested, tortured, released, went into exile, lived in the Netherlands, couldn't take it anymore. And then he went back to Syria knowing that he was wanted. He was arrested, disappeared for several years. Nobody heard anything about him. About a week before the regime collapsed, he was killed. So 3 days after the regime collapsed, there was a gigantic funeral for him filling the streets of Damascus, and many others. There were also stands demanding reforms, demanding that we know what happened to the detainees, demanding that the file be taken more seriously, because there was a lot of chaos in the way the prisons were opened, and a lot of documentation, important evidence was lost in the chaos. The people that worked in these prisons, in an attempt to maintain peace, to not have more confrontations, they were allowed to go back home and asked to withdraw their weapons, to put their weapons aside, and that they would be granted at least partial amnesty for the moment, unless they were like one of the main bigger criminals. But a lot of them fled the country, and with them they took their testimonies, you know, the information people need to know what happened to their loved ones. So there was, just a lot, really a lot happening. And now it's, I was just telling you before we started, the honeymoon is over. This weekend, things have escalated very, very badly on the coast.
Yes, Hasni, the honeymoon is over. The challenge that is that the new Syria has to face is just huge, both from within, from its neighbors, from the big regional powers. What's your assessment?
Alors on est le 8 mars. Il y a à peine 4 mois nous séparent finalement de la chute du régime.
It's only been 4 months since the fall of the regime. And when there's a radical change of an authoritarian regime that was in place since the 1950s, the challenges are naturally huge. But for the Syrians, they've been in a great mood so far. They've been delivered from their suffering. We've learned a lot about the suffering and the state terrorism, the actions of Syria as a police state, the armed groups, the terrorist groups who reigned through terror and who contributed to the war and to the radicalization of people's minds. Their responsibility is huge. And then we have the interventions from outside the country. So what we're seeing today is that Syria is at a crossroads, at a turning point. 22 million, the Syrian army didn't resist, even though they were not outnumbered. What's happening now is that the security situation is of the utmost importance, that we have to reestablish security before we can talk about sanctions, transition. And as we've seen in Latin America, there's a dilemma. Should we start with justice or with political transition? A lot of Syrians are saying that what's happened over the last 48 hours has happened because those who were guilty weren't brought to justice, because we allowed a new authoritarian regime to settle in. Can we expect transitional justice? That theoretically would be the best way for people to take part in reparation of what they've been through, torture, imprisonment, etc. There's another school of thought that says, no, we have to start with political transition and reconciliation, build back the institutions, hold elections, and leave justice for later. It's very important. We don't have the time nor the resources to go through decades and decades of demands for reparation and justice. or even reconciliation. It's paradoxical. Syria can't do all this alone, and this is why some countries are supporting them. The new authorities are looking towards countries, the richer countries, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, and of course, there's timid support from Western countries, but the security situation is a priority. Russia has not given up. Russia doesn't want and the Iranians are also worrying. There are also other cases close to Syria where former regimes are coming back or trying to destabilize the new authorities when they're vulnerable. And just like the movements like Bashar al-Assad before the fall, they can get help from foreign countries. They have support from Iraq, Russia, and Iran. And they can destabilize Syria in this vulnerable period. We've seen Syrians wanting to preserve the revolutionary spirit because it's the end of the Assad regime. So I'm not exactly pessimistic, but I would say that the Syrians have a lot on their plates. Contrary to other countries like Tunisia, where we didn't really see a return of authoritarianism. In Libya, the situation is different. There was no army, there were militias. In Egypt, when the president left, authoritarianism came back through a coup d'etat and then elections. In Syria, we've got an armed group that is still seen as a terrorist organization that has just taken over power. And its president became the de facto president of the country. And this is a situation which is paradoxical and never before seen in any transition process.
Syria can manage the big challenge of the minorities, because Assad was playing on the fact that the different minorities, ethnic minorities or religious minorities, could be united to face the situation. And now we see what happened in the past few days in Latakia with the remainings of the old regime. We have the crisis with the Kurds in the northeast. Israel is playing the Druze in the south. There is these tensions with different minorities. How can Syria face this different challenges and still remain a united country? It's a big question.
That's what we're trying to figure out at the moment. I think we just need to take a deep breath and not run after rumors, not after bots and social media algorithms that will polarize us more and more. What started in the coasts, like you said, it started by the remnants of the regime that were either not arrested or are hiding somewhere else, and sending support, sending reassurance that there is help from abroad that will come and that they should regroup and Russia will save you again and so on. We are hoping that people will realize that this is just another trap. And the news we are receiving is very chaotic. There have been huge human rights violations by both sides. So by the remnants of the regime, but also by some of the militias that were supposed to be now forming part more officially of
New
the
army,
ruling new army, quote unquote. Um, it's still hard to understand exactly what's happening, but it seems that it is exactly those Syrians that are voicing out rationale, that are voicing out unity, that are sometimes being targeted exactly for that. Because when you have militias whose profession is war, ending the war is not good news for them. So disarmament needs to happen also in parallel with providing people with alternatives. Because, I mean, regime forces, a lot of them were also drug addicts. I mean, the last decade has been the regime producing, becoming this global producer of Captagon. So you have these people that have been practicing carte blanche violence for over a decade, whose only logic and only skill, so to say, in life is to do that. All of a sudden, the tables have been turned. Their powers are taken away from them. Their jobs are taken away from them. Their drugs are taken away from them. They are sent home. Sometimes they're kicked out of their houses because they had illegally occupied it to begin with. They are in a state of desperation, and they still do have weapons. A lot of the weapons have been handed in, but not all of them. Russia still controls military bases. They still have air force going back and forth. Nobody knows what they're bringing. And there is, I mean, no matter how much weapons you collect, if somebody is still constantly bringing in weapons, then it's a futile task. So in that regard, international help is needed in order to convince international players to leave us alone. And then we can manage what's happening on the ground between each other. But if we have, settler colonial Israel doing land grabs and occupation every other month, a few more villages, they are promising to send weapons, they are playing their media games, you have they're even, offering to help the Kurds, and obviously lots of the Kurds were rejecting that. The complicated situation between Turkey and the Kurds makes life difficult because Turkey was one of the main supporters to stabilize. But if these cards are played against us, then we lose an important ally in stabilization. Many of the militias that are trying to form part of the army are mainly supported by Turkey and are not independent in their decision making, or at least they have not been so far. And like he said, I mean, a transitional justice process can take years. People are still in danger now and they need very quick solutions. So, there is so much I can say about the people that are in charge now of the current government. But still, I would really not wish to be in their shoes. This is a very complicated situation they have to handle.
Thank you. We have a good view of the complexity and the challenges. We go to your questions now. There are microphones available. So, if oh yes, there's one here in the middle. Monsieur, au milieu. Oui.
Bonjour. Donc je vais parler en français, désolé.
I will be asking the question in French. Sorry for that. So first of all, congratulations for your film. Obviously, there are very few films about what happened over those years, so this film is very precious. Congratulations to you and to your friends for trying to document this terrible time in history. I would also like to thank you for what you added You mentioned two countries that are trying to destabilize the region, Israel and Turkey. It's not just Iran and Russia. There's also the US supporting Israel. So I wanted to share a thought for the Palestinian youth and the Kurdish youth. They are not free people.
Je termine. Je vais poser la question. Ne vous inquiétez pas, c'est rapide. Que la jeunesse syrienne.
Syrian youth.
Ce n'est pas une raison pour ne pas se réjouir que la jeunesse syrienne n'ait pas cette possibilité enfin de pouvoir vivre libre. Voilà.
Syrian youth will now hopefully be able to live free. So my question, are you not afraid that Syria becomes the new Lebanon? Because for many years, Lebanon was the country where, the country which was used by foreign powers as a theater. Do you think Syria will become this very dramatic theaters where foreign powers play their own games? And would you call for an international conference where all those countries would get around the table with civil society, of course, so that we can try to find an issue to the conflict? Or would you prefer to solve this conflict among yourselves?
So things we could handle ourselves, we prefer to handle ourselves, but we can't handle international politics ourselves, obviously. So both layers of work are needed. Do I fear becoming like Lebanon? I also fear becoming like Iraq. I also fear becoming like Libya. I also fear we have endless fears. But the reality is that the Levanten coast, so from southern Turkey to northern Egypt, has been doomed to be the playground of competing international powers for over a century now. At the end of the day, the creation of the State of Israel was exactly targeting that, and it was a collective of interest, a collective of countries that came together to support and still support it until today. This is one state that represents international interference. So it's not only Lebanon. The Levanten coast is a very strategic area on the world map. It always has been, and our entire history is struggling with interference. So I fear it, but I also understand that it is just our fate and we have to face it.
Oui, ici. Premier rang.
Merci beaucoup pour ce film. Donc,
thank you very much for the film. I am Syrian and I've been living here in Geneva for about 20 years. So I spent the first 20 years of my life in Syria, and I have always been traumatized by the fact that we never could speak up against the regime in the streets. We were wary of one another, and seeing you filming under those circumstances, to me, it's so courageous. So if only for that, I wanted to thank you and your team for what you've done. You made that possible, seeing it on screen. I'm shaking as I'm speaking to you. You can hear it. It's such courage on the screen.
Juste une petite question.
I had a question. Are you still in touch with Rahid, the nurse?
He is more Susu's friend, so I hear of his news through her. I saw him once about 10 years ago. I visited him where he lives today. He still lives, actually he lives in Switzerland. And he lives in Switzerland now. He came here for treatment and he stayed. So I saw him once about 10 years ago. I would say he's doing well. He already had one son, now he has a second. I don't know if he would go back to Syria now and visit. I just I mean, today I can maybe give a bit more details about his work, because he was not just a paramedic, he was the head of the paramedic corpses in Damascus. And he was targeted exactly because he was helping the other paramedics respect their duty and serve everyone in all territories. And so from an organizational perspective, he had to be removed. So just that, because today it's a bit less of risk for him to say this. Unfortunately, in the film, we had to underestimate a lot of the characters and what they were doing. We had to take out a lot of details of the things they were doing. This is just a sample, a very small sample, but it was also, a generous collaboration from Switzerland to offer to treat him. So, thank you for that.
Donc pour la petite histoire et pour créer des ponts positifs, j'ai bien connu.
A little anecdote. I met Gerald here in Geneva. He was at the HUG, the University Hospital. His treatment lasted a long time, and I know his story, and I think he was very brave with everything that he went through.
Oui. Là, quatrième rang.
There's a question there in the fourth row.
Lina, thank you very much. This has been actually, extremely interesting. You shared a lot of wisdom, and I thank you for that. I love actually how much you seem very, very mature, actually, even at a very young age. Now, beyond all the good compliments I can share with you, I'm curious to know, today as a journalist and as someone as wise as you have been, thinking about Syria today, what is your call to action that you would like to share with Syrians abroad?
It's really time to get to work. I mean, before that, I could understand people's fears were very justified. People who chose to save themselves and their families and leave. People who thought that being involved and working with Syria was too risky for them and for their loved ones. People that had just limitations. I mean, there were people that were just physically too scared to go to the street and demonstrate. They couldn't handle the pressure. But we don't have to fear any of these things anymore. And so, no more excuses, please. There is a lot of work that needs to be done, and we really need all the support we can get. We need all the experience that people have accumulated through these years abroad. We need all the resources they can have, and there is a way to help. There's 1,000 ways to help. Everybody can pinch in, and so even if you don't necessarily know where to start, ask a friend, read an article, look at active groups online, get in touch with them, offer your help. Everybody needs a hand, and I'm sure they'll welcome it.
Do you see it coming?
Do I see it coming?
Yeah, that people get mobilized to help, and
they already are. Oh yeah. I mean, I can't keep up with all the new projects that are coming up, the new groups that are being registered, the associations, it's just non-stop meetings online all the time of people trying to coordinate and organize work. There's a huge amount of mobility happening. I mean, we're still not seeing very clearly the effects on the ground because it takes time, obviously, but we can barely sleep.
Yes, just here.
Merci beaucoup pour le film.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup pour le
Thank you very much for the film.
Pour Lina plus tard.
I can.
Parce que je m'exprime mieux en français et en arabe.
What about? Is there an Arabic translation?
Donc
no. Why don't you ask your question in French?
Je suis venue à Genève en décembre 2015.
I came to Geneva in December 2015. I fled Aleppo at the time, and I found it very touching to see what you were saying in the film. As a Syrian and an inhabitant of Aleppo, we were stuck in the house whenever there were bombings. We didn't know what was going on. We were always under siege, but we didn't understand what was really going on. The first time we were bombed, we were on the balcony, and because I was lucky enough to live in the eastern
mais j'avais de la chance de
part.
j'ai vu tous les hélicoptères, il n'y avait pas d'électricité.
So I saw the helicopters. We had no electricity, no internet. The telephone service had been cut because they didn't want us to know what was going on. And when I made it to Geneva, that was when I understood what had actually happened, because we didn't have access to the information when we were there.
L'électricité pour charger un
I
camion.
mean, we didn't even have electricity to recharge our cameras or anything. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you for making your film.
On a le temps pour une toute dernière
I
question.
think we have time for one final question.
Non, bah écoutez,
Juste pour dire,
Could I just say something?
dans même sillage que ce film, il y a environ
Along the lines of this film, there are 10 other Syrian documentaries on the revolution that I would invite you to. I can't think of the titles. I can remember 3. Jihad Aoulioud, a major Syrian actor who had to immigrate, who's working as a pizza delivery person. But then there's this film that talks about the revolution. Then there's Haski, where a lady talks about her daily life in the north of the country. And the third film that we saw was
l'hôtel des migrants,
the Migrants Hotel, which talks about Syrians who want to migrate towards the Balkans. So I think that it's fantastic to document and codify the Syrian revolution in this way. It will be useful for reconstruction, for reconciliation, but it's also very important, I think, to see what the daily lives of Syrians were like throughout these years. So just to tell you that there are other films out there. Thank you, Hasni. Thank you, Lina. Thank you to all of you.